promised the American people peace in Vietnam.
Rather than peace with surrender, let's have peace with honor for the United States of America.
Nixon wanted to end the war, but he also wanted to win the election.
It is now clear that Richard Nixon and close aides conspired to sabotage peace talks to get him elected in 1968.
They massively, directly, and covertly interfered in a major diplomatic negotiation, the most sensitive, not only going on at the time, but probably one of the most important negotiations in American diplomatic history.
With fresh evidence of historical significance and newly released FBI wiretaps, this program will piece together the plot that helped Nixon become the president.
That set the pattern of their contempt for the law, which led ultimately to their downfall at the Watergate Hotel.
He often said there are two types of politicians, those who seek power for the sake of having power, and those who seek power for the sake of what they can do with it. And Nixon always considered himself to be in the latter group.
He had what a lot of us called a light side and a dark side. He also was a politician, and he could be a cutting-edge politician. He could be devious. To me, deviousness is one of the requirements of the job, really.
Nixon had picked up from Charles de Gaulle a very high regard for the processes of government. By contrast, there was politics. And in politics, it was dog eat dog, you get the other guy before he got you. And there was no connection between government and politics.
The chair declares that Vice President Richard M. Nixon has been unanimously nominated to be the candidate of the Republican Party for the office of President of the United States.
The party spells out unity for its candidate, Richard Milhouse Nixon, the 47-year-old Californian, Vice President for the past 7.5 years.
The presidential election in 1960 was a defining moment in the life of Richard Nixon. It marked him as a politician and as a man. Nixon, the small-town outsider made good, was up against the glamorous and privileged John Kennedy.
Nixon had this fascination with the Kennedys because he thought they were in many ways rougher than he was, and in many ways less idealistic than he was, and they succeeded brilliantly to get public acclaim, and he didn't.
His own reputation for underhanded politics had already earned Nixon the nickname Tricky Dicky. But as vice president, he'd made a name in foreign affairs.
Nixon was an extremely complex person. He had a wonderfully good side, a man who was a great visionary. When I first met him in the mid-1950s, he talked about his dream for peace in the world.
Evidence of electoral fraud in 2 states. The result of collusion between local Democratic politicians and organized crime.
I think it was one of the evidences of nobility on Nixon's part, that even if he had been wrongly denied the presidency, even if it had been stolen from him, it was better for the country that he not challenge it.
Certainly, if this trend does continue, and he does become our next president, that he will have my wholehearted support and yours.
That always stuck in his craw. And it gave him maybe a distorted view of the political process, in the sense that they stole it from me once, they're not going to steal it from me the next time.
It was a searing experience. The early 1960s were Nixon's years in the political wilderness. He spent them planning his political comeback.
There's nothing like defeat to steel a politician to the determination to win. In the crucible of defeat, you seal your pact with yourself that you're going to win the next time.
Nixon joined a prestigious firm of New York lawyers. His most important client was Pepsi-Cola.
One of the reasons that he came for us was not just the money that the firm was going to get that we were paying him for legal fees. It was his ability to travel internationally and keep informed.
As Pepsi-Cola's ambassador at large, Nixon visited South Vietnam. It was a country whose fate was already interwoven with his own political career. It was in 1953 that Richard Nixon, then a young vice president, went on an official trip to Asia. At that time, Vietnam was still a French possession, but communist insurgents in the north were harassing the French and their colonial troops.
I think perhaps if we go over to the map here, I can indicate to you why it is so vitally important. Here is Indochina. If Indochina falls, Thailand is put in an almost impossible position.
Nixon became one of the first hawks to warn of the domino effect of communist aggression.
That indicates to you and to all of us why it is vitally important that Indochina not go behind the Iron Curtain.
The key to understanding Richard Nixon is that he really did believe that the great twilight struggle between communism and freedom, between East and West, was the most important struggle of his time.
1 year later, in 1954, French forces were besieged by the communists at a place called Dien Bien Phu. A massive resupply operation failed to tip the balance. Nixon was one of the first to favor military intervention, but President Eisenhower would not commit troops to a ground war in Asia. Nixon supported the use of tactical nuclear weapons, but Ike said, "The sun is still shining, Dien Bien Phu isn't the end of the world." Dien Bien Phu fell. The French surrendered. In Geneva, a peace conference left Vietnam divided into a communist north and a non-communist south. But there was to be no peace in Vietnam.
Under pressure of growing communist aggression, the flow of American equipment and advisors is increased. It is the only means of meeting.
In the 1950s, Nixon backed the deployment of American military advisors to South Vietnam.
Superior equipment and mobility are used to full advantage to carry the fight to the enemy, swiftly, wherever his presence becomes known.
Nixon supported President Kennedy's decision to reinforce the American presence in Vietnam. He also backed President Johnson when in 1965 he sent in combat troops and escalated the conflict into full-scale war.